And overnight, I could see all the chakras, could feel all of my meridian channels, could see my aura, could see other people's auras, etc. And all of a sudden, this unseen world was viewable, was perceivable, like very transparently. And I had to make sense of that. So I spent years, going through esoteric texts and occult studies and new age stuff, and finding the knowledge base that existed in the world, the only knowledge bases I could find that would account for the very unusual phenomena that all of a sudden I was experiencing all day, every day, transparently, no effort, just shattering my previous belief system. So
Hey, Guy here. Welcome to my podcast. My awesome guest today is Keith Parker, and I really like him. Really great conversation today. He teaches energy healing and has been on his own spiritual journey with awakening to the point where he said he was literally being able to tune in and see people's auras and chakras and other elements and miselements within the energy system as well, which I found fascinating. Going through my own experiences in life, I'm always enjoy speaking to people like Keith and having different perspectives, different languages around it, and there's always insights to learn. He's clearly works with energy a lot and teaches a lot of people his arts as well. So please make sure if you're watching on YouTube, let me know what you think of today's conversation in the comments below as well. And just a quick one as well, Bali, our retreat is coming up. It'll be here before we know it. End of June, early July, we'll be in Ubud for 6 days, mastering the inner mystic. It'll be myself, Matt Omo, who works with sound, and Petra Brozovic, who does Life Between Lives, energy center work, regression, you name it. We'll all be bringing our combined forces together. So if that tickles your fancy and you fancy a trip to Bali and come and join like-minded souls for 6 days and get out of your environment, be sure to come and join us. I promise you, you will not regret it. I am excited. It'll be the first time I'm going there. Anyway, let's go over to Keith. And let me know in the comments below. Much love from me. Enjoy. Keith, welcome to the podcast, my man.
So glad to be here, Guy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, fantastic. So first question, as always, if you're on an airplane right now traveling, you're sitting next to a stranger and they ask you what you do for a living, what would you say?
I think I generally just say I practice energy healing. I train and run an energy healing modality. And that's like the one sentence answer for people. And then, of course, that usually doesn't mean much to most people.
Totally. And just out of curiosity as well, how would you define energy healing? It's a term that gets thrown around quite a lot these days. Like it's, more and more people I guess, out there doing this kind of work. And I'd be interested to hear your perspective for sure.
Yeah, so it's actually a really good question, because if you say you use this simple term and then there's actually not a clarity, or there's even in a sense a general disagreement almost on what that means, it can be pretty confusing. If you Google search it, you'll see that energy healing is this like amalgamation of different things that somehow relate to subtle energy, the fact that we have an aura and that the energy referred to as energy healing has something to do with the idea that there's a disruption in the flow of energy through a person's subtle energy systems like chakras, etc., and that energy healing is are modalities or approaches that restore that flow or address the health system at that level. But in those categories will be things like sound healing and crystal healing and acupuncture and yoga and breathwork and tai chi, and you have all these different things. Except I'm not teaching any of that stuff when I'm teaching energy healing or practicing energy work with people. That's because we're doing what I would really call energy healing in terms of what kind of the best term I've come up with is classical energy healing. And that is like with something like Reiki, for instance, exemplifies, which is that we're actually running energy. Some people might say channeling energy even. But what we're doing is we're not working physically first. So like if you use a sound healing methodology with like bowls or tuning forks, you're taking something physical and you are affecting the person, but starting physically and affecting indirectly the energetic. With energy healing as practice, and as we teach at Field Dynamics, what we're doing is we're actually working with how you start to create changes in the field. You start in these realms of the energy field through the techniques of classical energy work, and it's working by different mechanism because of that, because we're not using physical means to initiate the healing work. And to me, that's like a very different world, a very different consideration than all these other kind of sub possibilities.
Yeah, got you. So just to break that down a little bit, there's a few things that were popping up there for me then. With energy healing per se, then, do you feel there's an end point in terms of the development of our energy field? Like, or it's now in harmony, or do you think it's a never-ending evolutionary process that we develop, can continue to develop our energy field that continues to support not only our way of being, but then our, I guess, awareness and level of consciousness from that?
I would say it's an ever evolving process. As long as our energy field is a fluid thing. So when we look at the dynamics of the human body, for instance, although the human body looks static at a microscopic level, everything's moving all the time at a cellular level, your blood flow, etc. Your energy field is actually doing the same thing. It is literally in constant motion at every single moment, your entire life. And the idea that it ever crystallizes into some kind of perfected form would be a naive notion. Now, there's a huge difference between the idea of something being really blocked up, really imbalanced, versus really open and really, really flowing. And there's a huge difference in the function and the health and the experiencer in the case of the two. But it's an evolutionary process that never ends, and it's just a matter of gradation, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. No, fair enough. And the other question that popped in there before we get into your own journey as well, just on energy healing, is that, you mentioned about that, and you can use something physical, like if you use the tuning fork, and that then becomes a conduit to affect somebody else's energy field. And it's us being the initiate. What instigates that? I had, Jonathan Goldman. Are you familiar with Jonathan Goldman? He came on the podcast a while back, who obviously works with sound. And his formula was awareness plus intention plus sound equals transformation. And without those first two modalities, it doesn't really matter what you do with the sound. It's just sound.
Sure. Yeah, the intention is a really big deal. And that's certainly one of the biggest words that you could add into the mix of what makes that classical energy healing work the way that it does, one of the kind of the catalytic mechanism, if you will. But then there's a lot of nuance and subtlety that builds upon the idea of intention. There's simple intention, there's specificity of intention, and then in particular with energy healing, what we're doing in part is we're also communing with, we're invoking, we're learning to work with what's usually just called higher consciousness, which means aspects of one's own consciousness or potentially even broader levels of consciousness beyond what we might think of as personal or individuated, that we're kind of calling upon, invoking, just as a shaman does, just as a contemporary energy healer does, to kind of bring in changes that the power or the horsepower behind that is not the ego, it's not the personality. And that's a really critical thing. And that's actually to be fair, that is the marginal place where what I'm doing day to day with people is unfortunately not something that we can really put under the microscope when it comes to science. It's not really something that either, like, whether it be the language, the linguistics, or simply the measurement abilities to understand that mechanism is something that just can't be at this moment. We're not there yet, and I'm a big adherent to trying to kind of drag piece by piece the world of alternative healing methods, and specifically energy healing, over into the light of mainstream conversations, a grounded, scientifically aligned, using scientific language to describe this phenomena, because it's very real, and I'm sure we'll get into why I'm really confident about that.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, well, because once you start to have experiences and feel that energy flow and feel that connection come in, it's real. But it would be, I'd been hard to have convinced until I actually have had the experience myself, and which I understand, and which is why there's a language. And I've had many scientists on the podcast speak of these terms and aspects as well. And just the last question on this one, Keith, but with the higher self and the higher consciousness, or however we look at it, I've heard like, the oversoul, there's so many different terminologies and different ways of experiencing that. When we call upon that and invoke that to come in, do you feel that we get out of our own way to allow it to do what it needs to do, or is there an intentional instructions behind it as well?
Well, I mean, the way in which we practice at Field Dynamics is we're very we have language that approaches things at all levels of specificity, whether it be very general and broad, where the idea would be get out of the way as much as possible. But there also would be ways in which we can understand how we can get very specific. We can like a laser, like a scalpel, and target very specific things that we want to work with and have that higher consciousness kind of be directed towards. And so I would say it depends on what the intention is, the specificity, etc. And then furthermore, when we talk about higher consciousness, we're immediately thrust into the bigger spiritual questions that more or less demarcate what spirituality is, in my opinion, which is the quest to understanding or answering the question of who am I and what is this? Like, what's reality object out there, and what am I subject in here? And ultimately, like, what's essence? What's the bottom of that? Is there a way to experience and know the root of that kind of duality, if you will? And higher consciousness immediately puts us into the realm of discussing identity. So if I'm referring to my higher self and I say I'm getting out of the way, well, then who am I and what's my higher self in relation to me when it comes to my identity? So in a certain level, you can look at it as separate, right? Like, oh, my higher self is something distinct from me. But in another level, you could say there's this potential that your higher self is just a facet or an aspect of you. So how can you get out of the way of yourself as well? So it starts to get entwined with deeper philosophical questions quite quickly.
Yeah, fair enough. And what about your journey, mate? Like, have you been aware of this kind of work your entire life, or was there an awakening? Was it a defining moment for you, Keith?
Yeah. So, we were talking a little before we got started and mentioned about, having a former life doing different things, maybe outside of this kind of work, and then having a calling, if you will. I very similarly, grew up an atheist, grew up in a very materialist scientific mindset and didn't take on any kind of religious or spiritual ideas from parents, etc. And I got involved in music. I was a musician, music producer in New York, studied jazz in college, just music was my life, etc. And as I approached 30, about 14 years ago, I saw that something wasn't working. I was just having a tough time, like not kind of depressed, kind of like not satisfied. And yet I had done all these things that I thought were supposed to satisfy me. I checked off the boxes, but it wasn't working internally. So I went on the inner journey, if you will, and I took on meditation and yoga initially and just wanted to find out what's going on inside, So it was the first time I really took on any kind of spiritual practice, if you will, and became interested in that at all. And I had a huge amount of skepticism about all these things. And I initially spent about 5 years being a very hardcore yogi, that really typified me, in the sense that I was, meditating, going on yoga, long-term solitary meditation retreats or silent meditation retreats, spending a lot of time in India. And I pretty much was absorbed in that world for about 5 years initially. And I mean, full-time, all the time, all day, just erase as much as my former life as possible. And I was interested in enlightenment. I was interested in awakening. Once I got a taste of that stuff, once I read about it, once I saw that there was such a thing as the idea of liberation and nirvana and these kinds of words, I was very intrigued. And that was my goal. And midway through that journey, about 5 years in, I started turning towards healing modalities, healing techniques, because I worked with some healers. I found that they enabled me to access areas of my own emotions in my body and my subconscious that I wasn't able to access through the methods I was using. And I was like, well, they're giving me the techniques I need to go further, deeper into myself. And I got very involved with craniosacral work in particular, a kind of form of bodywork, somatic bodywork. And after a few years of doing that, I started to really have my senses turn on, my subtle energy senses. And this is something that wasn't there in the in the world of yoga and meditation that I had previously, but in doing healing work with people, I started to have to learn how to track what was changing in them, and started with tissue changes. And then it started to become more emotional, empathic, energetic changes that I started to see off of people's bodies, and didn't know what in the world I was looking at, but nonetheless started to like see energy in a sense, and it started to become real. And I didn't have a belief system in place. I was just kind of curious but skeptical. And then I, as I kind of kept finessing this subtle sensing, a very catalytic event happened pretty much overnight. A very explosive kind of opening through classical kind of stuff. You mentioned the word Kundalini before we talked. Very much a Kundalini kind of thing. And overnight, I could see all the chakras, could feel all of my meridian channels, could see my aura, could see other people's auras, etc. And all of a sudden, this unseen world was viewable, was perceivable, like very transparently. And I had to make sense of that. So I spent years, going through esoteric texts and occult studies and new age stuff, and finding the knowledge base that existed in the world, the only knowledge bases I could find that would account for the very unusual phenomena that all of a sudden I was experiencing all day, every day, transparently, no effort, just shattering my previous belief system. So I built that up over some years and started to realize that as I studied different kinds of healing techniques that worked with the aura, and energy healing really to me sat center to me, then I started to develop a modality. I found a kind of a partner, and we launched Field Dynamics. And that's why I do what I do, is because I see the aura really clearly in a way that is pretty rare. And, it's not a belief. Like it's something that I can account for in a way that's very grounded, and it gives me great insight.
Yeah. Wow. When, like, you're taking me back when you had that explosion of that energy and that coursing through your veins. I remember when it happened to me, I was terrified there's one aspect of me like holy moly, is this going to just remain like this? And feeling that energy, and you could feel every chakra moving, and the torus, and through my hands, head, beyond my body. It was like, and I'd close my eyes, and all I could see was energy. Like, it was just freaking me out. And it was kind of like, but it settled down, and then you kind of, get on with life kind of thing. I'm curious, when it happened to you, were you excited? Were you scared? And when you say you see auras and energy, how does it look now? Is it visual? Is it beyond the visual senses? Is it like a knowing, a third eye?
Yeah. I'll two questions, right? So I had done a lot of preparation. Like, I did a lot of preparation. Now, the point wasn't to have an explosive Kundalini awakening. The point was to become liberated from false perceptions of myself that were kind of continuing my own suffering, my own self-deception regarding who am I and what is the truth. Like, really trying to get at what in the world is reality, and who am I in the context of reality. And in doing so and answering those questions, you can find tremendous amounts of freedom, peace, and you can contextualize your experience in a way that's aligned with what actually is, versus a false view of the self and what everything is kind of constructed for, let's say. So I had done a huge amount of preparation, and I would say, whilst it was an incredibly explosive and transformative experience that had lots of steps going towards it and lots of steps after the fact in terms that were really significant, although it was the most transformative single experience in terms of like mystical, transformative, just mind-blowing kinds of change, in a very short period of time I've ever experienced. I really was able to integrate it very well, quite quickly. Now, certain things just took quite a while to allow time to take place, and that would be in particular is my nervous system. And my nervous system probably took about a year and a half to start to calibrate to that, where I was basically like I'm trying to think of, I have it visually in my mind, a fire hydrant. It was like a fire hydrant of energy moving through me that was there was so much extra pressure moving through me for a good year and a half that every single morning I would wake up, it would literally be like the room was just like a tornado of energy flying all over the place in terms of waking up, and just the amount of flow in my own field and the circulation was just, it was just, yeah, a spout that was just explosive so long. And it took my nervous system and my perception to calibrate and integrate and kind of upgrade the function of that. If people want to think of it in certain terminology, think of it like you have an electrical circuit, and that's called our nervous system. And that electrical circuit can take a certain amount of charge. So when these kinds of bigger shifts take place, and Kundalini accounts for this at a structural level, when these bigger shifts take place, way more voltage, way more like energy is flowing through the system, and your circuit's not set up to deal with that much horsepower, to deal with that much voltage. So your physiology has to conform to it. And when your physiology is conforming to it, it has to adapt. And at the same time, if your physiology can't conform to it, then you have these strange things that are in this whole world called Kundalini syndrome, where people, the circuit board gets fried. They have all kinds of health issues. They have, psychotic or psychic disturbances. They can't handle the amount of stuff moving through them and changing so rapidly. But I was lucky in the sense that I really did the preparation required, and it was reasonably smooth sailing for me.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. You're sparking another question before you go into it. And I have to ask you, this is just a selfish question, but more, how do you nurture your nervous system these days?
These days, well, you know what? I'm really, really balanced and integrated regarding that energy flow aspect. So I don't get overwhelmed by, anything. I would say there's nothing in work that I'm doing, and there's nothing in life that's happening where I'm in a state of overwhelm. There are times when there's more charge, or challenges arise that are harder to deal with, but there's no overwhelm going off. So nurturing my nervous system, I don't generally think of, let's say, isolating or working on my nervous system specifically at this point. I tend to just do things that are nurturing to my system as a whole. So that would just be good practices like, a lot of the things that most people should just be doing for good health, get outside, fresh air, sun, exercise, eating well, proper sleep, and then doing the inner practices that I need that help me to feel like I'm spending that quiet time with myself when I need it.
Yeah, got it. Fair enough. So you spoke about seeing the auras and everything after that experience, and then from moving forward, what do you see? How would you describe it to someone?
Sure. I also just want to put a bullet point, or just like an asterisk, in talking about Kundalini. I think it's really important that people realize, because you've used the word, it's been important for you, that word, and how that has like a big amount of information associated with it. Me too. But Kundalini is actually a very complex thing. Is not straightforward. It's not something that people should necessarily desire, in my opinion. And furthermore, there are varying levels of what it means to have Kundalini shift and change. And there are different traditions that account for this very intelligently. The one I always point people towards is called Kundalini Vidya. There's a wonderful book called Kundalini Vidya by a lineage that by far is the best information I've ever come across. But there's a lot of immature and naive and misinformation based stuff around Kundalini that I think not only could be potentially detrimental to people, but also could very significantly mislead them. And I would hate for that to be the case with something that is very serious and not to be taken lightly.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to mention for listeners, there's a great podcast I did recently with Lawrence Edwards. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, that breaks all this down in a deep level. But anyway, continue, Keith.
Okay. No, you skipped off there for a moment. So seeing the field. So people, see auras in various ways. In particular, it's only so common of a skill, but there are enough people out there who say they see the human energy field in particular ways. The way I've come to describe this is in part because people ask me this question all the time, and the unfortunate thing in part is that I can't ever actually share that with somebody directly, and I tend to not want to kind of talk about or say things that I can't give people that direct verifiability in a way. But then there are the things that I know are my own and are unique to me, that the only way to communicate it is to share it transparently. So in taking that risk, there are two primary resolutions of seeing the aura, and they're very different. One is seeing the aura through the first layer past what we would call physical, and that would be seeing the astral plane. And this is where most people, they see the aura in this way. And that's when they say like, oh, I see blobs of color moving around people. And, maybe they see objects or beings or, things like that in the person's field. Images are often associated with astral imaging or astral perception of the field. And the astral is when we look at the aura, it's the first layer of the aura that basically has to do with information past the physical. And that's the plane of the heart. And people who are familiar with astral projection, out of body experiences, lucid dreaming, all that stuff, a lot of shamanic journeying is all taking place in general by focusing on that aspect or layer or information range within one's field, within one's energy system. So I saw that layer for about 2 years initially post that Kundalini opening. And that's what was just being seen all the time. So with eyes open, I'd be walking around and I would see bubbles of light around people's bodies. And there'd be kind of this I describe it as almost like a liquid kind of color palette that would swirl around in a very syrupy kind of way. And I could see that myself. I could see that in other people. It's very dense. It's very emotion or sensation rich when you kind of zoom in at that level of perception, just like you can get really, really focused on your digestive system, or you can get really focused in your heart and really zoom in and really get in touch with the sensorial landscape within that kind of frequency range of your system. The same thing is true with the aura. When you zoom in on certain areas, it has certain kinds of qualities. And the astral is really, really sensation rich, feeling almost like the raw juice of emotion, in a sense, is what the astral is. That went on for a couple of years, and that's with eyes open. Then what started to happen is, as I basically did my own work, because what I was doing was I was clearing that astral level very intensely in me, really the undealt emotions, the deeper, uncomfortable emotional disturbances within myself that I hadn't ever even been able to access in that way. And that's where I had to spend that initial 1.5 years, 2 years post it. As I cleared that, as I kind of worked through those layers, then other changes took place in later Kundalini openings, where all of a sudden my perception fully opened up to the next layer within the field. And that's seeing the field in the higher 3 levels above the astral. So if we think of the levels of the field as correlating to chakras, and we have 7 chakras, the lower 3 chakras pretty much are that's what we call physical reality. This is the way I talk about it that I think makes a lot of sense to people. The lower 3 chakras is basically it's your physical body, it's your personality, it's nature, it's what you see. It's what we agree is there. Astral is the kind of the crossing over intermediary in the center, and it's its own specialized plane that's very particular. But then the upper 3 are reflections or inversions of the lower 3. And the upper 3 are classically called the light body. And this is where we have more of what's his name? Alex Gray. Is that his name? The artist? Some people who are listening to this will know, but basically this is where we get to sacred geometry, where things are basically a field of light and the organizing feature is geometric, and the light or the color is completely different than the astral. The astral is like a syrup, a smeared syrupy liquid kind of thing that does not correspond to the 7 colors of the rainbow in the same way that the light body is specifically the 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 layers. It's pure color. Each of the bands is a very, very pure color. And the organizing feature is geometry. So I don't see the astral pretty much ever anymore, and I'm glad not to be honest. If I wanted to focus in on it, I could train myself again. But what naturally comes to me is that if I close my eyes, and you can't see the light body with your physical eyes because it's non-physical. If I close my eyes, just effortlessly, what's there is basically a black background with a kind of a toroidal rotation, where there is an always fluid rotating energetic thrust, very similar to water. If you saw water in a pond or something, kind of swirling around. So rotation, and the rotation is superimposed upon a kind of geometric lattice structure. And that geometric lattice fundamentally is kind of almost like a grid. And then that grid has certain geometries being accentuated, and there's a color. And the color corresponds to the frequency range or the dimension that's dominant within the field. So when I connect to myself or I close my eyes, that's what I see, and it'll reflect my own system and what the frequency dominance or dimensional dominance is at that moment and its energy field dynamics. And then the same is true if I connect in with somebody else. I get a glimpse into what's going on with them at that level as well. So it's very structural. It's very mechanical. The other piece that's worth mentioning, that kind of where I, in a sense, kind of, I want to say excel, or just what I'd say is like effortlessly my skill set, is also that everything that's happening in the field is felt through my body. So there's no separation between what I'm seeing mechanically as the dynamics of the energy field and how there is a constant and continual, totally open correspondence between how what's going on in the field or energetically has its correlation within my physical body. And this is a really important thing in general for people to learn about when it comes to learning about the aura, is that your aura, everything in your aura maps onto your physical body. There's like every single thing happening in your physical body has like an information or energetic correlate within your field. But the difference between the field and the body is that the contents of the body is called what we call like biochemical process and what your body's doing, right? Physical material. But everything that's going on in your field is actually what's going on in your mind. And so it's more like a psycho-emotional landscape, what the energy field is. It's really, in a sense, a map or structuring of the mental, like a readout of what's happening mentally, psychologically, emotionally with us in every single moment. And this is where we see, and where I have a big messaging point around the body-mind connection. And I think that the field is actually this missing link to understanding the body-mind connection, in that there's a coordination between what has been called the aura for a long time and our physical body.
So if you got, let's just say, certain elements showing up, manifesting in the body that is, could turn into disease, like something's not functioning, then what you're saying is that if we go to the field first and start to harmonize the field, then that information exchange to that area should start supporting that and allowing it to find its natural harmony. I'm just trying to use particular words here without getting myself in hot water, but what we currently do, or we are conditioned to do, if it's physical and we can see it, then we have to treat it physically, and we don't support any of the other aspects of it. Like, what have you seen even through your own work? What does tend to shown up for people? What results have there been?
I don't want to get too like give you the list of examples of one miraculous thing after miraculous thing kind of thing. Yeah. But what I'll say in general is that from a holistic healing standpoint, what I see every day with people, or work with myself, certainly in my own process, has been that as you clarify yourself energetically, and what I'm saying here is your energy field, and then what I'm saying is that really we're talking about the contents of the mind. Like what is in your memory? What are your belief systems? What held emotions are you still are not resolved in you? As you clarify those things, your physical body tends to, or seems to, from everything I've ever seen, seems to be able to function much, much better. More vitality, more health, more balance, etc. And it's kind of funny that, I think both of us to some degree, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but on some level have to be conscientious about overstepping the bounds of like what's appropriate to say, what's not appropriate to say, given the allopathic model of medicine that's out there right now. But what we're finding, I think, at this point is that our culture is in a sea change. Our world is in a sea change of understanding what health really is. And more we're open to the body-mind connection, and how much, when mentally we're not dealing with things, when stress keeps building up, how much that impacts the physical body. And whether it be alternative medicine, whether it be forms of psychotherapy using psychedelics and stuff, going to these things, there are forays into terrain and horizons that literally 10 or to 20 years ago were unheard of to be talked about publicly by doctors and mainstream medicine, and now are actually the cutting edge of the new thing. So, to say that if you have significant stuff that you don't deal with, if you experience a bunch of trauma and you just suppress that trauma, right? You just hold it in. And that's what a Western psychologist would say. You've had 30 years of suppressing the hatred towards your father, and now you're having these, panic attacks, Okay, so your body's having a panic attack because you have psychological overloading that you haven't dealt with, right? And all we're doing is taking one step further and saying, okay, well, if you want to know where that stuff exists, where the content of that stuff is, it's not just as simple as saying it's your brain. It's that if you actually look at it, that energetically, psychologically, that your energy field is the container for these things. And if you actually start to look at it through that structural lens and you take on practices that clarify yourself energetically, that what happens is as you clarify those things energetically, your physical body is then alleviated of the pressures that may show themselves as symptoms or different forms of disease process.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm just curious on your thoughts on this, but when you start exploring the concept of past lives and also the concept of epigenetics and things getting passed down ancestrally as well, and that the field of information is holding all that, what are your experiences or thoughts upon that?
Yeah, well, we have to have a really radical re-envisioning of ourselves. Just like I was talking about the higher self, the moment you start to even consider the implications of how this stuff works and what it means to who and what we are, by just simply looking at the mechanics of what's stored in the field, like what's going on here, we have to question a lot of things. So you say past lives. We cover this a bunch in field dynamics in terms of ways of working with this phenomena, but the phenomena is real. I mean, people out there might not believe in reincarnation, etc. That's fine. You don't have to believe in reincarnation, but you can read, one of 150 books written by doctors documenting tens of thousands of cases of people having memories of past lives. Or I could tell you that I've had a lot of spontaneous memories of where I'm somebody in a different life that has no context whatsoever within my ancestral lineage. And it's been a very, very significant memory and a very important piece in my own healing process. And so those things didn't come across when they popped up spontaneously in me. They didn't come across as any kind of dream-like experience. They didn't come across as any kind of, metaphor or symbolic something. It was very, very as real can be. So past lives are something that people have to deal with the phenomenology, but the mechanism is something else. You could think of it as literal reincarnation. You could think of it as collective memory, like Jung's collective unconscious. You could think of it as, you mentioned genetics, it's really fascinating to think that you could take a hard drive the size of your thumb and fill it with genetic material, like store information in a genetic thumb drive. And the amount of information you could store in that one thumb-sized thumb drive of genetic material would be all of the information that mankind has ever generated. The entirety of everything we've ever coded, like every encyclopedia, everything on the internet, everything ever recorded in human history could fit on one thumb drive of genetic material. So your whole body's made of that. So the idea that genetics could be a physical correlate to a kind of recording mechanism, and that the information of humanity is somehow embedded or encoded in genetics would be a totally reasonable assertion. It's not like that's something that even genetic science has ruled out. They're just starting to realize all the stuff they call junk DNA is actually really important. So we don't know stuff like this. We don't, people think that we have the mind figured out. Just ask yourself the basic question. And I'm not saying to you, Guy, but just to people in general. I love this question. Where's your mind? People ask yourself, like, where is your mind? Where's the location of your mind? Because your body's in space and you get that, like, okay, here's my body. There it is. There's a reflection, length, width, and height, that kind of thing. But like, where's your mind? And do you think anybody has a good answer for you, when you say, where is your mind? And if your mind if that's not an easy question to answer, then shouldn't we be like really intrigued that given we all know that we have a body and a mind and we wouldn't know the answer to where's my mind, that we should be really kind of curious about what the implications of that. Like, what if your mind, for instance, is non-local to your body? What if you generally tend to keep your attention around your body because that's where you're kind of hooked to. But what if I told you that, if we were to all at once think about the Mona Lisa, if we all just said, I'm focusing my attention around the Mona Lisa right now. And the Mona Lisa's in the Louvre in Paris, right? So if I focus on the Mona Lisa, what happens around the Mona Lisa? And what if I told you that you could take a little voltometer, a thing that measures electromagnetic fields, the charge of an electromagnetic field, and that if 10 people focused on the Mona Lisa, that there would actually be a little thing that would tick up on the voltometer, that it would actually go up physically recordable, that would actually increase the electrical voltage around the Mona Lisa. And that's because your mind is actually going, your attention is actually going and being present at the Mona Lisa, right? That's something you can measure and verify. That's been done by a bunch of scientists. And that would mean that you're not located, your mind is not just here. It's not just where your physical body is. It's actually wherever your attention is. And that's a really insanely important thing to start to consider what that means. I mean, so big questions. I guess I'll finish. I know I'm carrying on, but the big questions that we have to ask ourselves about who we are, we don't actually have answers to these things yet. And people I feel like a big mission of mine. One of the things I really try and, kind of prod people about is don't get fooled into the idea that we have it figured out. We have no idea. Science has no idea about probably the 3 or 4 biggest questions to ask. They have no answer at this moment. It's an open-ended question. And, if we don't take these bigger questions seriously, then I really think that we're not honoring what we kind of need to do. We need to get things in order.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I guess the way things are moving and more people are looking for alternatives. My kind of romantic vision, it's only a matter of time before we really start embracing these aspects of ourselves more and more. But time will tell. So if somebody's listening to this right now, and they go, okay, I get it. I really got to start working on the field aspect of myself, not just the physical aspect, to support myself so I can become a whole, healthy, happy being. Is it? How do I frame this question? I think what I've noticed in our workshops and things like that, there's this point, I just want you to wave a magic wand and remove all this shit so I can just continue living my life. Can you do that for me, please? Because I'm done. I'm done with it and I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
Right. But sadly, from what I've witnessed anyway, it doesn't quite work like that. And when you speak about layers as well, how do we then work with layers? Is it an ongoing journey? Have you found it gets easier and then you kind of find yourself over time? I'd love just to explore and talk to what you've experienced.
Yeah. So, I founded Field Dynamics along with Christabel. She's my partner in Field Dynamics. We've been around for 5 years, and we specialize in long form trainings with people. So we saw that things like, certain types of energy healing exist, but a lot of them are very short form in terms of the training and the depth and the knowledge base, et cetera, and the open universal nature of those teachings. So we created a modality to give people an experience and structure their learning and their transformational process such that they can see what it is to go very deep within a particular healing technique and art form, and to see what change is like over time. Because going in and doing a single weekend workshop, it doesn't give you a sense of duration. What is it like to learn something, integrate what's changed, go back, go a level deeper, integrate what's changed, go back, go a level deeper, integrate what's changed. We understand that this is what has to be done if we're going to learn to play music, if we're going to learn to become a doctor, if we're going to learn to become a chef. You have to learn a skill set, and there are beginner levels and intermediate and advanced levels of doing that. And nothing just you can't learn anything very well in a day, or other very, very, very simple things. But certainly when it comes to healing ourselves or developing or maturing as human beings, that certainly is not going to be what you learn in a day in general. So people tend to come with whatever issues they're working with, right? So sometimes it's sometimes it's like I have a relationship that's really challenging for me with one of my parents, and I feel like my family just drains all my energy, or something happened a long time ago. There's trauma I can't get over, or I'm having a physical, like symptomology, like my hips aren't working anymore and my certain organs aren't functioning so well, or I have chronic fatigue issues. Sometimes it's people that just are seeking a lot more peace and balance in their life, etc. But nonetheless, we need to kind of arm ourselves with a technique that enables us to be effective and efficient with our time, and that enables us to go deeper and deeper with it. But not only a technique, but also the kind of frameworks that support the technique, in the sense that, well, okay, fine, so what? I could, learn an energy healing technique and do something that gets a lot of change energetically. I can work through some emotions. I can work through some held, tensions in my body. I can allow certain things to be released and let them go. And that can happen in an hour or two in a session or something. But what about when the next day, when the thing that I was working on, which was like my anxiety or something, and I let go of some of that anxiety in the moment. What happens when it just arises in the middle of the day the next day and I feel really anxious? What do I do then? Do I go into some kind of automatic pattern of running away from it and thinking, oh, woe is me. This is so terrible. I wish I wasn't anxious right now. Or I'm anxious because these people are doing something to me and I have no part to play in it. Or is it valuable to start to kind of reframe the context of what's happening? So do you position yourself as the hero within your own story and start to see that the only way to empower yourself is to start taking responsibility for things and to say, oh, you know what? I have anxiety right now and I have an opportunity to be with this anxiety in a skillful way, such that I don't have to identify and attach to that anxiety, but I can actually go, oh, anxiety, this is really uncomfortable, but it's also an opportunity for me to not go into that anxiety related pattern that I always go into, and instead learn from it and start to make new associations, right? To create new pathways and possibilities. So it's important that people learn techniques, and those techniques shave off those layers. And that's a concentrated technique, shaves off a layer, like with sound healing, energy healing, really good quality meditation, breath work, etc. You can shed a layer off in a concentrated period of time. It's a formal technique. But if we, at the same time, don't pick up more intelligent, we might say more skillful ways of operating in the world and understanding the purpose of why things are happening to us, how do we orient ourselves in a way that can make it like a win-win all of the time, right? We can have really challenging situations where we say, this is great that it's really challenging, not this sucks that it's really challenging. And we can learn to take on those frameworks and reconsider and recontextualize our experience. And in doing so, we have the concentrated formal practice, but then in real life, as things were organically happening, we also have a way that can transmute things in real time. And in doing so, that to me is where you're really starting to get a broad and integrated practice, where it's not so much about a layer only in a formal practice, and then the layer regrows, if you will, in life, because this is the point of the healing work and taking it into a more holistic, day-to-day, moment-to-moment kind of thing. If you just stick with formal technique, then what happens is you work through a layer or something, and if you don't have skillfulness in life in general, all that happens is you go through the same patterns that regrows that layer, if you will, right? So the idea is you shave off a layer, and then you have the opportunity to repattern it by having it be such that when it arises again, when that same stimulus arises in your life the next time around, you have a way to engage with it such that it continues the healing process throughout, formal and informal practice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It reminds me of that saying I've mentioned it many times on the podcast, but the true act of meditation is not what you do with your eyes closed in your practice. It's actually what you do with your eyes open for the rest of the day. And yeah, that's definitely where the rubber meets the road for sure. Keith, as we come to a close for the podcast, mate, last question for you. We've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners to ponder on in everything we've covered?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned something that inspires this around the person who says, "Hey, come fix me." All right, just like make it happen. Snap your fingers, click your heels together 3 times. Make it go away. Um, if we really want to change, we need to invest in and truly desire and be committed to that change. And we're the only ones who are capable of making lasting changes within ourselves. Healers, facilitators, teachers, modalities, whatever, they are support systems for you to do what you need to do for yourself. And it's never going to change. And for people who really want to experience change, you have to confront your own fear. You have to become courageous, and you have to be willing to say, I'm choosing to take this on. I'm going to do what I need to do to make those changes in myself. And I'm responsible for myself. And that is basic maturity. It's maturity in terms of being a grown up, from a kid to being an adult. I'm responsible for myself, but it's also a requirement for spiritual growth, is that an increasing amount of um, responsibility, self-reliance is taken on, and follow your passion. Now, I think when people say, okay, I'm ready to do this, like I feel like I'm in the right place where I'm searching, I'm seeking, I'm, finding out what is it that might fit in terms of, a technique, a community, a modality, etc. Go with what resonates with you. Allow allow your heart. You could even, poetically say, allow your soul to draw you towards what gets you excited, what kind of ignites the fires of passion inside of you, that you get excited about something. And that, to me, is the signal that your radar is pointing in the right direction. So find those supports, find those techniques. But for many people, techniques are transient. You jump into a community for 6 months or 2 years or 10 years, and then you're in a different stage in life. You love a teacher, you read all their books for 6 months, a year, 10 years, but then you're in a different stage of life. It's you that's the constant. So, connect with yourself, follow your passion, and go towards those support structures that help you along your own journey, but realize that it is your journey. And facilitators like yourself, Guy, or myself, I find we're just, privileged shepherds, privileged, witnesses to other people's process. And we just bring a skill set to bear to help people, further along that process, but that in general, that we trust that the real power in people to change is within themselves.
Beautiful. Good man, Keith. Good man. Where can people find out more about your work and everything that you're doing? I'll make sure there's links in the show notes for when this goes live, Keith, but please.
Of course. Thanks. Yeah. So, I was excited, the timing actually of this podcast, because you guys are over in Australia, and Field Dynamics is actually running a number of events in Bali. So in mid-April through mid-May, we have our long form EHT 100 training. We generally have done it 6 months online, but we're compressing it into a 24-day in-person immersion training. So that's taking place in Bali, up in Ubud, in mid-April through mid-May. And there are spaces available for that. And then while we're in Bali, we're also going to be doing a retreat, May 30th through June 8th, like a 10-day retreat. And that's also going to be in Ubud. And that has about 4 or 5 spaces remaining as of now, as we do this today. Okay. So for people interested coming to Bali, that would be a real option. And in general, everything we do can be found on fielddynamicshealing.com. That's our website. We have all of our trainings, private sessions, if you want to ever do a session with myself or Christabel, but the website has really all of the information.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Keith. When you're in Bali till, we're almost going to cross paths, I think, when we run our retreat there in Ubud.
Yeah,
at the end of June.
We're pretty much out of there when the retreat ends. So I think it's about June 8th or 9th. We're out of there. When do you show up?
I think we show up like on the 19th or something like that. So literally a week and a half in it, 2 weeks. That's a shame. It would have been good to meet in person.
Yeah, that'd be really great. Well, we'll pass the baton at least energetically, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I know that you'll really enjoy Obed. You were telling me first time in Bali, so it's a wonderful place, and people should definitely get over there if they haven't ever been there. It's a very special place. The land, the people, the environment. It's quite something.
Yeah, no, I look forward to it. I look forward to it. Good man, Keith. Thank you so much for coming on the show, mate. And it was really great to connect. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Guy. I really appreciate it as well. My honor to be here, and really happy to have the opportunity to speak to you and to your audience. And hopefully, there's been some benefit to the listeners from today's talk.
No doubt. No doubt. Thanks, legend.